But a shadow had touched my heart, and I was afraid as I had never been. I have walked beneath death's umbrella, and thought there was none darker. But there is. There is. Hello and welcome to another spooky book review. Now today we'll be reviewing Jerusalem's Lot by Stephen King. Now this is a short story in Night Shift by Stephen King, of course. And it is the first story in this collection. Now this is not to be confused with this one, which is Salem's Lot. And this is the more popular one. This is the one everybody knows. This is the one that has just had a new movie come out that, I haven't seen it, but I saw the trailer and, A book this size needs a TV series. We are not discussing Salem's Lot. We are discussing Jerusalem's Lot. And Jerusalem's Lot was published in 1978, whereas Salem's Lot was published 3 years earlier in 1975. Now you might think, that's a bit confusing. Well, it's not really, because Salem's Lot is short for Jerusalem's Lot. And that is the actual name of the town in Salem's Lot. People just call it Salem's Lot, it's a nickname. But Jerusalem's Lot is a kind of prequel to Salem's Lot, and it's set in the 1850s. Now, this is your spoiler warning. There will be spoilers in this video for this short story, and there may be spoilers for the bigger novel, although I will try not to. Now, Jerusalem's Lot is written in a series of letters and diary entries from a man named Charles Boone's perspective. Now, the first is dated the 2nd of October 1850 and is addressed to his childhood friend and work colleague. We only know him as Bones. And this first letter details Charles's arrival at his ancestral home of Chapelwood and the overall look and location of the house, which is described more as like a mansion than just a normal house on a hill. Chapelwood, the mansion, is perched on a cliff top. It's crumbling, it's ancient, and it is overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. And this house has been passed down through the Boone family until it came to Charles's brother Stephen, who fell to his untimely death from the front porch of the house and tumbled down the craggy cliffs into the sea below. And we also find from this first letter that Charles is not alone in this house. He doesn't have a family like a wife and kids, etc. But he has come with his manservant and his friend Calvin. Now, about a week after Charles's arrival at Chapelwood, we find that there is a little village not far from the house. It's sort of down the lane, down the hill, around a few corners, through some trees, and then you get to this lovely little village called Preacher's Corners. And this is where Calvin sources groceries, wood for heating, cleaners to come and clean the house, etc. Everything that they would need, they can source in this village. And he comes back and he relays to Charles what he has heard in this village about Chapelwood. That the village folk think that Charles is mad for taking up residence in this house, that anyone that would live in Chapelwood must either be a lunatic or run the risk of becoming one. Which amuses Charles no end. He doesn't believe in all this stupidity, and he dismisses it straight away as stupid superstition, much of which he attributes to his cousin Stephen's side of the family, that they haven't talked to each other because they were known as being, a bit eccentric. Quite a lot eccentric and, a bit mad. And it's here on the 6th of October that Charles first mentions that he thinks he can hear the scuttering of rats behind the walls. And Charles says that these must be very, very big rats because they are making a lot of noise inside the walls of this house. But he never finds any holes, and he never finds any rat droppings, which he finds a bit odd. And we also get some details on this big family falling out. That there was a rifled desk involved, there was hard words between two brothers, which ended in generations of estrangement on both sides. And then we skip to October the 16th. And Charles has written another letter to a different friend, this guy called Richard. And Richard is a journalist with a legal mind, and Charles asks him if he can do him a favour. He wants Richard to ask one of his contacts who specialises in historical law what he knows, if anything, about a deserted little village near Chapelwood with the quaint little name of Jerusalem's Lot. And we also get another letter penned the very same day, but this time to Bones again, that details a lot of the backstory to do with Chapelwood and the family fallout. And I'll read this to you. So Charles is talking to the head cleaner that's come in, and the head cleaner and her gang of cleaners have worked in Chapelwood before, and this particular one is like the head of them. And he asks her why the maid seems so flighty when he enters a room, why one of them actually screamed when he appeared in the doorway, because, you know, it'd be quite unnerving in your own house to find somebody to do that. And she turns to him and candidly says, "They don't like the house, and I don't like the house, sir, because it has always been a bad house." My jaw dropped at this unexpected bit, and she went on in a kindlier tone. "I do not mean to say that Stephen Boone was not a fine man, for he was. I cleaned for him every second Thursday all the time he was here, as I cleaned for his father, Mr. Randolph Boone, until he and his wife disappeared in 1816. Mr. Stephen was a good and kindly man, and so you seem, sir. If you will pardon my bluntness, I know no other way to speak. But the house is bad, and it always has been. And no Boone has ever been happy here since your grandfather Robert and his brother Philip fell out over stolen," and here she paused, almost guiltily, "items in 1789. She continues, "The house was built in unhappiness, has been lived in with unhappiness. There has been blood spilt on its floors, as you may or may not know. My uncle Randolph was involved in an accident on the cellar stairs which took the life of his daughter Marcella. He then took his own life in a fit of remorse. The incident is related in one of Stephen's letters to me on the sad occasion of his dead sister's birthday. There has been disappearance and accident. I have worked here, Mr. Boone, and I am neither blind nor deaf. I've heard awful sounds in the walls, sir, awful sounds, thumpings and crashings, and once a strange wailing that was half laughter. It fair made my blood curdle. It's a dark place, sir. Ghosts there may be, but it's not ghosts in the walls. It's not ghosts that wail and blubber like the damned, and crash and blunder away in the darkness. Some die not, she whispered. Some live in the twilight shadows between, to serve." Creepy, right? Now later that night, Calvin finds, after trying to locate all this scratching going on in the walls, because it is on and off and very annoying, he finds a yellow folded map on one of the bookcases in the library. And it's a little map of a few houses on it and a cross that depicts a church. And it has Chapelwood in the top corner. Now the church bears the legend, "The worm that doth corrupt." Now, having nothing better to do, Charles and Calvin decide to explore the day after and try and find this little huddle of houses called Jerusalem's Lot. And find it, they do. Now the village is completely abandoned. They explore the buildings and everything is layered with dust, but everything is set out as if people just got up and disappeared. There's meals laid out that are full of maggots at this time. Everything is rotting away. It is just really atmospherically creepy. And Charles raises the question that everything is just abandoned as if people just got up and left. But for how long it stood, why is everything just abandoned and yet unbroken? Because like with most places that are abandoned, you get either smashed windows, kids try and vandalise it, there's graffiti everywhere. This place is perfectly preserved. And then they make their way to the church. I'm back with my book. It reared above us, grim, uninviting, cold. Its windows were black with shadows inside, and any godliness or sanctity had departed from it long ago. Of that I am certain. We mounted the steps, and I placed my hand on the large iron door pull. A set, dark look passed from myself to Calvin and back again. I opened the portal. How long since that door had been touched? I would say with confidence that mine was the first in 50 years, perhaps longer. Rust-clogged hinges screamed as I opened it. The smell of rot and decay which smote us was nearly palpable. Cal made a gagging sound in his throat and twisted his head involuntarily for clearer air. I did not feel calm. I believe that there are spiritually noxious places, buildings where the milk of the cosmos has become sour and rancid. This church is such a place. I would swear to it. We stepped into a long vestibule, equipped with a dusty coat rack and shelved hymnals. It was windowless. Oil lamps stood in niches here and there. An unremarkable room, I thought, until I heard Calvin's sharp gasp and saw what he had already noticed. It was an obscenity. I daren't describe that elaborately framed picture further than this, that it was done after the fleshy style of Rubens, that it contained a grotesque travesty of a Madonna and Child, that strange half-shadowed creature sported and crawled in the background. "Lord," I whispered. "There's no Lord here," Calvin said, and his words seemed to hang in the air. Now Charles, in his infinite wisdom, decides that in this creepy church, he decides to walk up the pulpit. And on the pulpit is a book. And this book is entitled The Mysteries of the Worm. And as soon as he touches it, the place seems to shimmer. And he can hear low chanting noises. And it ends up with them having to escape. He just picks up the book and runs. Why wouldn't you just leave that shit there? Now, a few days later, things start to pick up the pace. Charles goes into Preacher's Corners, and he gets stoned for his troubles. And he seeks out Mrs. Chloris for answers, she being the head cleaner. Because the cleaners have also stopped going to Chapelwood as well. Something's going on. And when she finds out that not only has he discovered Jerusalem's lot, and been there, and been inside that unholy church, but that he discovered this book, then everything just spills out. And she implores him to leave. Not just Chapelwood, but the state. She goes on to say, "There has been an evil breath in the air since you took up residence. In the last week, since you set foot in the accursed place, there have been omens and portents. A call over the face of the moon, flocks of whippoorwills which roost in the cemeteries, an unnatural birth. You must leave." Now he brushes this off as, just it's fanciful, even though he's been there. And she says, "Is it a dream that Barbara Brown gave birth to a child with no eyes? Or that Clifton Brockett found a flat pressed trail 5 feet wide in the woods beyond Chapelwood, where all had withered and gone white? And can you, who have visited Jerusalem's lot, say with truth that nothing still lives there?" I could not answer. The scene in that hideous church sprang before my eyes. "Do you know the history of your family as it applies to Chapelwood? Philip Boone was mad," she said. "A man who trafficked with the unholy. The thing which Robert Boone attempted to remove was a profane Bible writ in the old tongues, Latin, Druidic, others, a hell book. I have seen it. Touched it," I said. It seemed again that she might swoon. A hand went to her mouth as if to stifle an outcry. "Yes, in Jerusalem's lot, on the pulpit of a corrupt and desecrated church." What relation had Philip Boone to Jerusalem's lot? "Blood relation," she said darkly. "And on the night of October 31st, 1789, Philip Boone disappeared, and the entire populace of that damned village with him." Now she wouldn't say much more, just a few ramblings of blood calling to blood. Now it skips to October 20th. They can't go in the village anymore, but they decide in their infinite wisdom, Calvin and Charles decide to explore the cellar of this house where they cannot find the big large scratching in the walls because now it is near constant. And in letter form there's a few hurried notes about what was seen in this cellar, this horror that they experienced and can hardly write about. And it's only after a few days have passed that we, the reader, get to know what happened. In the cellar, there were no rats. In going around this cellar that has twists and turns and corners, they come to an alcove which has a single chair in the middle of it, stood beneath a hook in the ceiling with a decaying hemp rope over it. And this is where one of Charles's relatives hung himself with the body of his dead daughter at his feet. You think you've got family troubles. Now this corpse isn't dead. It comes shambling out of the darkness, reaching towards them, and it isn't alone. The corpse of the dead daughter, with her head at a lunatic angle, shambles towards them as well, out of the clammy, cold darkness. Dead bodies come at them. Charles ends up throwing a candle into both of them and turning with Calvin and running and escaping back upstairs out of the cellar, never to return down there again. Charles fears that by going to Salem's lot, and it is said Salem's lot and not Jerusalem's lot at this point, that his blood has awakened a force in that desolate town that has remained dormant for years. He never should have touched the book. He never should have gone there. A force which has taken his ancestors as Nosferatu. I've got to say it like that, I just have to. He now adds that he writes these letters only for himself, as he can no longer go into preachers' corners to mail them. So he's just talking to himself, more or less. Now Calvin ends up finding the diary of Charles's grandfather, Robert, who was the brother of Philip, who disappeared in the lot. And he sets about deciphering it. And we get the deciphering. King doesn't just write that he deciphered this diary. We get about 5 pages of this diary in its entirety, listing all the events that happened, the build up to this argument, the backstory of Jerusalem's lot, Chapelwood and Preacher's Corners, which I'm not going to spoil. If you want to know it, you've got to read it. Now, on finishing deciphering this diary, Calvin keeps Charles drugged so that he will not go to Jerusalem's lot, and he makes up his mind to go to the village for help. He doesn't like leaving Charles on his own in this accursed house, with the lot so close nearby and the pull of blood so strong. But he ends up going to Preacher's Corners to try and get help to get them to escape, and the villagers stone him. And the whippoorwills have started to gather around the house, not just in the trees, but they're everywhere. They're on the roof, they're on the garden, they're everywhere that they can fit. And the scurrying in the walls, which died down after the cellar incident for a few days, has begun again in earnest. Now Charles, after waking up from this drugged-induced sleep, resolves to go back to Jerusalem's lot. And Calvin goes with him so that he does not have to go alone. And that last note, that last letter, is dated the 26th of October. Now the next note, so we've had, a few days, the next note jumps to the 4th of November. It begins that Charles doesn't really know what date it is, as he is still weak, but at least now he is more lucid enough to write. And he says, quite matter-of-factly, that this is his last night. He hasn't eaten since the 27th of October and bemoans that Cal is no more, that he sacrificed himself for Charles to the nightmare that dwells in Jerusalem's lot. And Charles begins recounting the events of that day, how Calvin came upon him when he was trying to sneak away, and says that he can't allow him to go to that place alone. How such a feeling of love overcame Charles that this person, this servant essentially, would not let him face these demons alone. And how on the way down the lane to Jerusalem's lot, not a bird sang, not an insect buzzed, nor an animal shuffled. The only sound was the distant roar of the sea. Now I'm not going to spoil what happens at the end. There are pages and pages that I could read, but it is chock full of spoilers. If you want to read it, it is sold on its own, but I highly advise you getting Night Shift and reading everything in there, because it is a collection of short stories. There's plenty of different stories in there. Jerusalem's Lot is the first one. Now, when I first read this short story, it is the longest one in that book, I found it a bit boring, to be honest, compared to some of the other stuff he's written and that I had read at the time. I found it to be quite, boring and a bit dull. But coming back to it years later, I found a new appreciation for it. It is slow and it is foreboding, a point that I missed when I first read it. The tension is palpable. The scenes where they descend into the cellar and what happens there, and the first discovery of the abandoned township of Jerusalem's Lot is chilling. Now, speaking of Jerusalem's Lot, the only thing that ties this to the bigger novel of Salem's Lot is the title of the town and its location being in Maine. But as a Stephen King book, that's not much different. Most of them are set in Maine somewhere. It's not in the same location because Salem's Lot is not, the sea is not even mentioned in Salem's Lot, which it would be the type of book it is, but it's not near the sea. There is a big house on the hill, which is the Marston house, but it's not Chapelwood. The Boone name is not mentioned. If he'd have changed Boone to Barlow, it might have tied in a little bit better and been more of a backstory, but he didn't. But besides that, this short story has absolutely nothing to do with its more famous parent. So for me, this story got 3 stars. It's not great, but it's not awful either. It's slow, it's unnerving, and it has a big cliffhanger at the end, which is why I'm not going to go into detail with it. But I do recommend you check it out. I will post a link in the description below of where you can buy Night Shift. You can go to any book retailer, you can get it anywhere. But for this season, I highly recommend it. And the reason that this is coming out on the 17th of October is because it is the publication birthday of its more famous parent, Salem's Lot. So if you have read this story, let me know your thoughts on it in the comments down below. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel for all the spooky goings on, and have a happy Halloween.